All right. Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be, gentle viewer. This is Commander Culture, your perspicacious purveyor of samizdat, and we are joined today by Templar. Ms. Cherie is taking the day off. We apologize for not having streamed last week. There were some technical issues on my end, and we welcome you to this installment. Today, we're going to be talking about the seminal time for choosing speech that Ronald Reagan gave in 1964, about 20 years before he became president. And wow, is it relevant for today? We are, it looks like we're also joined by Jake in the chat. He says we better be engaging today. We've got a 45-minute drive home after a night shift. So Templar, let's keep it snappy so that Jake does not drive into a snowbank.
Jake, we got a good one for you. As Commander Culture already alluded to, the Ronald Reagan speech there, and I think the most shocking part about it is how relevant it is today, and then how far we've come since then, for the better or worse. But it's good and it's eye opening.
It sure is. As I was telling Templar before the stream, this is the first time I've actually read through the speech. We're not going to read through it line by line, but we're going to hit some of the highlights and talk about the relevancy, the good and the bad, what's changed, and see sort of how it holds up and it's surprisingly pertinent for today. What we've got up first, though, here are Karl Marx's 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, and we thought that it was useful to juxtapose sort of what it was that Ronald Reagan was railing against and saying, this is the problem that we have. And he was surprisingly kind to his liberal counterparts, who in 1964 were probably well-meaning and genuine people, not bloodthirsty, slobbering communists. But what we have, as we have today. But by looking back at what Karl Marx wrote in the 1840s, we can sort of see how far down the rabbit hole of communism we've gone. On this channel, you will hear the opinion that the United States of America has been primarily corrupted, if not co-opted, by communism, and I think that view is shared by my co-host.
Yeah.
So
subverted would be another way of describing it.
Subverted, exactly. Yeah, damn commies. It's a good kind of laugh, but at the same time, it's also like it's a little bit scary. If you've been to places where communists have spread their seed, so to speak, you can see the
fruits of their labor
marks on the land, the fruits of their labor, the poisonous fruits of their labor, and it's a monument to human suffering. Okay, there's really no other way that I can put it, and well, Reagan's going to put it better than I will tonight as we go back over his speech. But and I thought to myself, and this is an aside, Mr. Templar, that maybe we could look back at other seminal speeches from the right. I particularly want to go over the Rivers of Blood speech from Enoch Powell, if you're familiar with that.
I'm not actually.
Oh, really? Well, we're going to be in for a treat. So here we've got the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, and real quickly. Oh, Trotskyites. Okay, if you're not reading the chat, Jake Wilson is saying basically, I think what he's saying is we've got Trotskyites in control of the United States. I would wholeheartedly concur, and those people can't even succeed at communism, which is, failing upwards writ large. We've got the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto with us, and if you're not viewing on the screen, you can just listen to the sonorous sounds of my voice as I sort of go through them. And what I picked out when I looked at these 10 planks, there's only 10, is that 7 of them are in force in the United States of America in 2020, 2022 now, and three of them are not. Three of them are something that we're not really even looking at currently.
Questionable potentially.
Two and a half, sure.
Yeah.
And we can debate that as we go
just
through
touch
it.
on it. Yeah.
Well, so number one of the Communist Manifesto, basically abolition of property and the application of all rents to public purpose. So that is the governmental seizure of all property, land redistribution, whatever you want to call it. And we're not facing that or really anything like that. Although Ronald Reagan will tell us later today that that process that they now call eminent domain was something that was a big problem even in 1964, which I was not aware of. But it was enough that Ronald Reagan got up at the Republican National Convention and spent a couple paragraphs talking about it. So what do you think there, Mr. Templar?
No, that's you touched specifically on what I was going to mention. Abolition of property in the United States is not a specific policy prescription anywhere, but it's more of like your property is a privilege, not a right, and can be taken from you at the whim of the government, which is true. We just don't think about it because it doesn't happen to that many people that often, but it's no less a front. And I understand circumstances under which that might be necessary. What's good for the or what's bad for the hive cannot be good for the bee. So sometimes you're going to have to put collective interests above individual interests. That's where I part from libertarians, and I think the inspiration for that is throughout history. You've seen, and especially with the Romans and their many crises, oftentimes the civilization itself is spared extinction through basically foregoing all individual rights entirely and forcibly collectivizing, out of necessity. That being said, the United States has never been in a position where Hannibal's at the gates and we're basically running around, grabbing spears out of shops in order to defend our homeland. So to that first point, no, it's not specifically a policy prescription. However, it's basically has an asterisk next to it where, point number one of Karl Marx's planks, U.S. government reserves the right to abolish property and land in the application of blah, blah, blah. So that's the way I interpret that one.
Especially at the individual level, right? So, and I guess that's the only difference here is that this plank is talking about a large scale situation, and we've seen that in communist countries, but where the United States exercises that is very much at an individual scale. You don't pay your taxes, you're going to lose your property. Specifically,
that's what I would say is that's probably the worst application of that first point specific to the U.S. is like, you think you own a house, you paid off your mortgage, you paid your dues, cool. Stop paying taxes, see what happens, see how long you own that house or that piece of land. So that's the piece where that's pretty heinous, and I wouldn't expect that from any self-righteous country.
Well, and it is sort of telling too that. I'll give you a quick juxtaposition. When I was spending some time traveling in Eastern Europe, I was driving on a highway, being driven, I should say, on a highway in Lithuania, and it was a raised highway that all of a sudden veered out in a sort of a crescent and then went back to being straight. And I was like, "Whoa, what was that all about?" And the driver said, "Hey, look at that house, that old brick rundown looking house that's in the middle of that crescent." I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "Yeah, there was some old guy there. He didn't want to sell his property. Everyone else here, they're like, oh yeah, our house is a piece of crap. You're going to pay us a good amount of money. You're going to build a nice road that goes through it, and there's an off ramp. So, we can build a little gas station and everyone can get employment following the fall of communism." And this one guy just said, "Nope, I'm not doing it. I'm not selling it." I don't know. And nobody knows really why his reasons, but that was what his reasons were. And they didn't eminent domain him. They didn't tear down the place. They didn't guilt him into selling it. He just got to keep living right there next to a 4-lane highway that went all the way around. And God knows how much extra money it cost them to build that extra crescent. But I thought to myself, in America, they would have just torn that thing down. They would have called the guy a loon and dragged him off like they did to crazy old Maurice in Beauty and the Beast. Or they would have, hounded him or something like that with eminent domain laws and city regulations. Wow, the land of the free. Moving on to point number 2, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Now, that's the wording that Karl Marx wrote down. And as we were talking about before the stream, what is it? The 16th Amendment? Is that what you said?
16th Amendment. Yeah, that's the one that income tax.
Yeah, and it was passed by a group of people who called themselves
1913.
the drumroll progressives. And it's a graduated income tax that basically says the more money, the more income that you generate, the more you got to pay. And that is in fact, not only is that un-American in the sense that, hey, we didn't do that before, but if you go back into the Constitution, and forgive me for not knowing the exact citation of where this is found, it prohibits a progressive income tax. It prohibits a graduated income tax. It literally says every single person shall be taxed the same to the extent that they are taxed. And there was no income tax at all when the United States was formed. And in fact, the income tax itself is unconstitutional, which is why they had to pass a constitutional amendment. Probably one reason why it was unconstitutional is because it was un-American. And, if the IRS is listening, I pay my taxes, but I don't like it. So there you go. We'll just any thoughts on that before we move?
That one's cut and dry. It's literally, it is what it is. We just have the second plank. We've embraced it wholesale. It's just
for
part of
years
American. And it was 1913 when that came about. And
the memes. Where it says like the conservative case for gay marriage or whatever. This is the conservative case for communism, because I've stood up in public meetings, statewide Republican meetings, and I've said the progressive or graduated income tax needs to go, and everyone's like, you don't want to pay your fair share. And by everyone I mean boomers. No offense to the boomers who I'm offending, but like, this is who it was. You don't pay your fair share. What do you mean? Everyone has to pay. I'm like, no, they don't. What did they do before 1913? I don't know. I never read a history book.
Exactly.
And it's like, are you a moron? Can you please step back slowly from the voting booth and never approach it again? Because you, sir, are a communist with an elephant on your hat. And without knowing it, you've become a rhino. It's one thing that really rankles me. Anyhow,
the country grew to be the most powerful country in the world without an income tax. I think we'll be fine with that one. We don't need one. So, but we have it.
Absolutely. And do you know, incidentally, how we funded the federal government before the income tax?
I believe it was tariffs.
It was. Ding, 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 100 points for Mr. Templar. Tariffs, which, if you know anything about economics or have read any Pat Buchanan, is something that will actually grow the domestic economy and improve the balance of payments, improve the balance of the budget, and it will increase the employment ratio. Great stuff, but that's not what we want in a communist country. Number 3 plank on the Communist Manifesto says the abolition of all rights of inheritance. Well, in America, we haven't abolished all rights of inheritance, but we've definitely made it difficult to pass your stuff on. Right. A lot of it basically in the form of taxes. They've said, we're going to take this, we're going to take that, and here's the thing. It's all double and triple taxed anyway. Everything you have, it has been taxed at some point, and now you're taxed with a death tax or whatever the Republicans were calling it under Newt Gingrich when you go to the great beyond, if you do it the right way. So there you go. We're well on the way to abolition of rights of inheritance. So you best find some good way to pass stuff on to your heirs that is both legal and allows them to get the most out of your productive labor. Thoughts on that?
That one's pretty cut and dry too. Honestly.
Cut and dried.
Yeah, it's just we're at 50%. We're it's like whatever the percentage is for your when you die, whatever cut the government takes. It's like that's how much of your third plank rights that you don't have. So you could just watch that percentage, and then once it hits 100, you'll be like, all right, we made it, but it's on its way there. And I don't like 50%. I don't like 5%. How about 0? How about I can give my kids my hard-earned living, then I don't want it to go to anyone else. I want it to go to my blood. So it's only fair. I don't think I need to sell anyone on the justification of inheritance being passed on to children here. And I often understand, the intent behind it with like, oh, we don't want rich people to just grow rich kids. But if you ever read Thomas Sowell's Economics, he talks about that, about how oftentimes the rich kids no longer are rich because they don't have any of the skills that made their parents rich because they just grew up getting money. And then the reverse of that is a lot of people who were not in the top 1% end up becoming in the top 1% because they had to work to get there. And anyway, number 3, we have it to some degree, and we shouldn't, is the takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, even if you read something like The Great Gatsby or literature like that, it's like, these people are all going to lose their money that they inherited because they're morons. There's some show out there now where it's like these, my B-list celebrities' kids are now going to like some ranch or something like that, and you're like, every single one of these people is a complete idiotic loser. Their parents somehow climbed the ladder, they didn't. And so any money that they inherited, they would automatically lose. And anyway, like you said, we're
you don't have to worry about that. Yeah, it is what it is. And
we're already on number 3 only out of 10, and already the white stripes on the American flag are starting to look a reddish hue. Number 4, confiscation of the property of all emigrants. That is people who flee the country.
Yeah.
Are taxed, basically. Well, California has already talked about doing this to people that are fleeing that fiasco of a state, and the United States federal government already does this now to people who renounce their U.S. citizenship. Not in like I'm defecting to the North Koreans or something, but just in hey, I think I'd like to take citizenship in Bahamas or somewhere that treats me better on a tax and income basis. And they're like, nope, we're going to take all of that, yoink. And they do. Confiscation of property of all immigrants, fourth plank of the Communist Manifesto. This is a big one, number 5, and I want to get your thoughts on it because you are the economist among us. Says centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank. Wow.
Yep. National Bank, and it's funny that they say national bank because, as we know, the Federal Reserve is a privately owned bank. Man, if I had done my due diligence, I could show you the percentages. The main owners are Citibank is the largest owner of the Federal Reserve, followed by J.P. Morgan, and then I forget the other ones. But between those first two, it's pretty much over 50%. But it's functionally privately owned and influenced, even though it's a quote unquote national bank. It manipulates interest rates, holds a monopoly on the US dollar. It's basically exactly what Marx had in mind and totally fulfills this plank. Like it's a 1-for-1. And most people believe that the Federal Reserve, again, is just something that America's always had. We've always had a national bank and everything. It's not true. It was created, with its bastard brother in 1913 with the 16th Amendment. Those were both stood up at the same time. And honestly, if you've ever read Ron Paul's End the Fed, he speaks to how when a nation is able to manipulate its currency, it basically just turns into a murder machine because there's nothing stopping it from going to war. And then you have all of the interests who want the country to go to war because of all of the dollars that they can make. And there's no politicians that have any reservations about voting on that because they're not going to be the ones who pick up the tab. They can just print more fake dollars and then, we'll get you on the back end. But basically, yeah, number 5, this is probably the worst. If I could end any of these in America and make any of them right, it would probably be that one. That I think that's probably the most important one out of all these because a lot of these stem from that. So
yeah. It's funny you mentioned that Ron Paul book, End the Fed. You can buy it on Amazon or your local bookstore. I've got it on my bookshelf right now. I'm looking at it longingly because boy, that guy. I've got another sign somewhere else that says "Hope for America" when hope actually meant something. And boy, if we had Ron Paul as a president, we might be looking at a better country. Just saying. Yeah, means of a national bank. Andrew Jackson, a national hero, throttled the
Oh
first
yeah.
one, and we didn't. We again, the largest expansion, the greatest prosperity in American history was done without a national bank, without an income tax, and without a national bank. It's almost like you don't need those things to run a country. Number 6, this one is split half and half, I would say. It talks about centralization of the means of communication and the means of transportation.
Okay.
Currently, yeah, go for it.
If you had asked me this 2 years ago, I'd be like, nah, man, government can't control the internet and they hate it and it's hilarious. You know, it's you screw those guys. It's great. They're never going to be able to control the internet. What has happened within the last 2 years is what they call public-private partnerships. And it's and I always people always used to talk about like, oh, the private companies are stealing your information. I'm like, who cares? It's a private company. I trust a private company much more than I trust the government, and they have a commercial interest in preserving people's privacy. So like, I don't see any problem with this, and like everyone's freaking out for no reason. And then you realize that they have what's called public-private partnerships (PPP), and it's literally just telecom companies, Verizon, AT&T, selling all of the phone data to the government or just providing it whenever law enforcement asks for it. And it's Google, Facebook, Twitter. These entities essentially function as intelligence apparatuses for the government. And, you know, again, has the government centralized the means of communication? They have the FCC. Sure, there's a regulatory entity for the means of communication, but I would say that functionally, yes, they have done that. They have centralized means of communication, because I don't think there's any way that you can communicate with someone other than face to face. And even then, it's still being tracked, but there's no way you can communicate with someone electronically without it being tracked, unless you do very, you know, obscure
Elaborate.
roundabout ways.
Yeah.
VPNs and torrents and dark web stuff. But even then, there's really no piece of electronic information that cannot be conjured, just pulled out of the air by the government. And it's not the government doing it themselves because they're too incompetent. They just print off their fake dollars from their Federal Reserve and they fork it over to any company who either already owns that data, which, you know, Google, I guarantee you there is somebody out there who owns that data, whatever the data is, whether it's from your phone or computer, or the entity will find it. So technically no, but functionally yes, for number 6.
Or just through government R&D, I'm putting air quotes there, the entity gets stood up in the first place. So like Google, a lot of Google's founding money came from government type sources, the same with Facebook. And so, you know, it's like, oh, well, we hand out money to everybody. It's like, well, yeah. And then whatever they come up with, they're partly beholden to you. You know, and that public partner, what did you call it? Public-private partnership, right?
Yep.
The PPP. That's exactly what I was thinking of when you were discussing the national bank, like how the Federal Reserve works. It seems like it was a prototype or something for a broad public-private partnership where it's like, oh yeah, this is a private entity, but it does the bidding of the deep state, you know, of the state beneath the state. And to come back to our original point, the deep state is something that Reagan talked about in this 1964 speech. He didn't call it the deep state; he called it the bureaucracy. But he said basically this is a tyranny in and of itself, and that is what this public-private partnership, I can't speak today, is. It's sort of spreading. You know, it's like what was that? The Zerg or whatever. You know, and
the Borg.
Yeah, I mean they just send their tendrils out. And it's like, oh, well, this isn't like, you can't, you know, do anything against us. I'm just a mere drone, you know. But okay, now let's move on.
Real quick on that. Well, you know what else
Sure.
that's happening too is the military. The number of private contractors in the military is skyrocketing, so much so that the Space Force has more private contractor personnel than actual military personnel. It's basically like it's just becoming one big mercenary force, and they're contracting all these things out because private entities have a lot more wiggle room than the government, and it also gives, it's not necessarily plausible deniability, but it raises less eyebrows when Blackwater massacres a bunch of people. It's like, well, it wasn't the U.S. government. It's like, okay, they were working on behalf of you, but either way, whatever.
Yeah, it's like who fired those bullets? Well, I don't know. He's since resigned, and we don't know where he went, kind of a thing. I'm seeing it. For those of you familiar with the Aliens franchise, it's like we're gonna have our own Wayland Yutani syndicates going, where it's like private military. Because why? I don't want to go into ragging too hard on the military, but it seems like a works program. Let me just put it that way.
Yes. Yes.
And not as a functional means of defending a national interest, right? Or extending the long arm of the governmental will. So anyhow, let's move to number 7, shall we? So we're moving right along, clipping. Extension. Oh, and I want to thank, by the way, the people who subscribed before we came on live today. I appreciate all the subscriptions we have. Please tell your friends. Number 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state in accordance with a common plan. Now, this is for me, I checked yes on this. Now, we don't have every single factory in the country owned by the state. But what we have, again, is this public-private partnership where most of the means of production have been outsourced to foreign slave factories, and the instruments of production are owned by the state via the capture of Wall Street through the national bank and easy money. Any disagreement there or thoughts on that?
No, and another same source, Federal Reserve, fake money sort of thing, different avenue is just the subsidies themselves. Like, yeah, you could pump fake money into it via Wall Street, or you could just directly hand out subsidies, whether that's agriculture or anything else for whatever reason. It's just convenient ways for businesses, Monsanto's, DuPont, or Big Pharma even lobby politicians. In return, they get a nice little, blank check from the government. It's a nice little feedback loop of infinite dollars at your expense. So it's another way of, it's not owned by the state, but you could make an argument that there's not going to be new defense contracting agencies unlike Northrop Grumman and Raytheon, because if you're just an up and coming company, you either have to have some like wonder weapon, or you're not really going to have a chance that you're going to get these government contracts. They're just going to hand them out to these large companies. And then not only that, what these large companies do is they'll stand up shell companies, because you can only get like percentages of amounts of dollars from the government. They try to spread load some of these contracts because they know that they would all go to the same company. So Northrop Grumman stands up a shell company under a different name, throws some side projects at it to give it somewhat of a reputation, and then that small shell company applies to the government and gets those contracts as well. It's just a disgusting feedback loop, and it's all at your expense.
I think if we in the audience sort of sit down, we could come up real quickly with agreement on like the top 20 largest companies. You mentioned DuPont and Monsanto and Northrop Grumman, and which used to be Northrop and Grumman, and Lockheed Martin, which used to be Lockheed and Marietta, and all these others. Yeah, that control that sit in bed, shall we say, with the federal government. And it's almost like, it's not like you have a centrally planned economy, but that's not what Marx says. He says a common plan, not a central plan. And it absolutely reeks of corporatism, which is a function of fascism. But but it seems to me, as I'm looking at it, to be indistinguishable functionally from state-owned enterprises in the Soviet Union and corporatist owned entities in, say, fascist Italy or something like that, where the people in charge are in agreement with the other people in charge, and they move forward, prospering themselves at the expense of the common folk. I won't call them a mass, because Ronald Reagan rails against that in his speech. But what are your thoughts on that? I mean, because it's clearly like it is corporatist what we have, and that isn't exactly what Marx is describing here. But I would say functionally it's the same.
Yeah, I agree, and it makes you wonder how many of these companies would even exist without these government handouts. And we really pride ourselves as being a land of the free sort of thing. Then any company that cannot survive without government dollars should not survive. But again, these things are usually hooked up to life support, and that life support being Federal Reserve dollars.
Mm-hmm. Right. Number 8 here. This is one that we do not quite yet have for different reasons. It says equal liability of all to labor, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. And the reason that we don't have equal liability of all to labor, which means basically everyone has to work, is because our system isn't even that advanced. We're further down the path of destruction than Marx, would have even thought possible, because here we don't have to have people work. And I would venture that, what was it that that scumbag Mitt Romney said? Something like 51%, it's probably more now, of the country does not in fact contribute to the tax base, right? Mm-hmm. They're not working. 51, more than half the country is not equally liable to labor. What we have is a purely extractive system, which is, by the way, very unsustainable. Anybody can tell you. And so in communism would actually be an improvement here with number 8, where we would have equal liability to labor. Right. Yeah. Because trust me, in ye old Soviet Union, if you did not report to the shoe factory because you didn't feel like it, or your baby mama was yelling at you at the phone last night or something, they sent a squad around and you were back to work. But here, we don't need a productive class. But there, pretty much it ends, and we're back to number 9 now. Back to where the United States of today intersects with the Communist Manifesto. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Oh, did someone say Monsanto earlier in the broadcast? Yeah. I believe you did. And that's exactly what it is. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing. That's like big ag, combined with big pharma, combined with big offshoring.
Mm-hmm. I don't think they're talking necessarily about what's called economies of scale, where the larger a company is, the more it can take advantage of better deals or mass production. Essentially, it's basically why stores like Home Depot are able to outprice your local hardware store. The larger a company gets, there are some inefficiencies. Those are called diseconomies of scale. But there are also efficiencies that come with mass production, and those are called economies of scale. So I don't think they're talking about something like an agricultural business that's modernizing and becoming industrial and then sort of bleeding into the manufacturing industry. I think it's more so kind of just it's abolishing, like it says, the distinguish between town and country, where everyone has to live equally horrible lives. Like, those people who are out in the country, just minding their own business and everything. No, they need to be drinking poisoned water and inhaling polluted air. We need to basically make everything look like a giant city, and everyone's equally miserable. Well, that's how I interpret that one.
The bonus, I guess, if you will, is that there's a corollary to that, where if they drag all of us country bumpkins into the city to be miserable, they also drag those parasites that live in the city back out to the country, and they make them, till farms and, dig potatoes and beets in the winter. And that was a fun feature of the Soviet Union and Communist China. But I actually had a different thought when I read that. Because, by the way, so it says combination of agriculture and manufacturing industries and the gradual abolition of distinction between town and country. And I said, you know what? The first thing that jumped into my head when I heard abolition of distinction between town and country, suburbs. Suburbs. And suburbs are
bridge the gap, sort of.
They are the abolition of town and country. They destroy the country, and they allow the pressure of the city, which would normally erupt in revolution, to bleed out. And, forgive me for saying, because I did grow up in a suburb myself, but suburbs are cultureless because they're new. There are no suburbs that go back, way back into the way back. You're either a country boy or, you've got a city with a history like New York or London or Paris or, Dusseldorf or something like that. But it's terra nova there in the suburbs. And so it's like, I'm looking at that and I'm going, holy cannoli, this is a plank of the Communist Manifesto to have suburbs. And no other countries really have them.
That's because when America is building and we had the blank slate of city planning with the combination of modern technology for the first time in human history, you have the automobile, and so you can afford to live 15 miles away from your place of business, and like you said, it allows the state to consolidate the problems that come with masses of people into the city, and then again, there's that pressure release valve of people being able to leave that hellhole and go live somewhere that's slightly more tolerable, while also having all the modern conveniences and infrastructure in their suburbs. So it's a match made in hell, I guess.
It's very interesting. I mean, they have some suburbs like America, similar countries like Australia and Canada, but even countries like Britain, countries like Japan, they don't have suburbs, and it's not because they didn't have that transition from rural to urban. It wasn't because they didn't invent automobiles at the same time. There's something unique. What I always thought it was, and I actually did some study on this in my undergraduate years, is it has to do with the Civil Rights Act of 1965. But that's all I'm going to say about that before I move on to number 10, because that may be a subject for another day. And number 10 is, to me, we've got number 5 as Templars number 1, and number 10 for me is number 1. And this is the thing that you can smack your normie friends and your libtard relatives with right over the head. Plank number 10 on the Communist Manifesto literally says, free education for all children in public schools. Boom. If you have free education for all children in public schools, if you believe that is right and correct, you are at least 1/10 communist. You dirty, stinking, rotten communist scum. And by the way, I don't happen to believe that education should be free, nor do I believe that all children should be in schools, nor do I believe in public schools. So I am a pureblood, as you would say, on this particular topic. And I think that all of these ills, 9 through 1, going back up, stem from propagandistic education over the last 100 years, since Thomas Dewey came along and was like, oh yes, everyone needs to be socialized in my particular way. And it destroyed the one-room schoolhouse and created a one-size-fits-all solution where proto-Karens could come in and have their little brood that they shape in their own image. And that's the problem. Free education for all children in public schools. Oh, a viewer dropped off. I guess I offended them. But I don't care. This is a big sticking point for me. And I think it's important because most people don't realize, again, like a lot of stuff we're going to talk about with Reagan coming up. Oh, we've been talking a while, is that, we take this for granted. Oh, public education, of course. Yeah, the conservative case for all children being educated. No. If you've been in a public school, I think Jake was mentioning studying a speech in his high school class. Like, if you've been in a public high school, you know that most people should not be there. I include the teachers, but the students. They should be out baling hay somewhere. They should be out, fixing a car or slinging slop for hogs or something else, manual or domestic, or something that's not of a high elevated academic pursuit, because they're just not cut out for it. And this is why our system, our society, has become completely distended And it's because we tell people that they can do all the greatest things that the greatest minds in human history could do, when in fact they are completely and utterly incapable. And if you don't believe me, look up a TikTok video anytime you want. Final thoughts, Mr. Templar, as I dominate this edge of the conversation.
No, I mean it's just sad to see the United States, the beacon, the city on the hill, adopting so many of those points, and we're all kind of aware of it in the back of our head. But I think what we aren't aware of is like how far back this goes, and you could argue it starts with the Federal Reserve in 1913. At least that's what I would say, where we really started going wrong, kind of at the turn of the century there. But it's worth it to keep your eye on this kind of thing and just watch the remnants of freedom sort of crumble, and then also to show this to people. I think that's the greatest utility of this knowledge, is just letting people know, like, hey, one, America was not always this way, and two, it was not supposed to be this way, and three, the people who
we don't have to live this way.
Yeah, well, we don't have to live this way, and the people who hate America are the ones who want us to live this way.
And the ones that are currently in charge of America, I would say.
Yeah. So it's good to have in your back pocket. What can you do about it? That's probably a discussion for another day. But again, it's like, we don't like Karl Marx. We don't like Marxism. Yet somehow we have adopted all of his talking points as our own. So at least now you're aware. That's always the first step.
There you go. Thank you for those closing words on the Communist Manifesto. I'm sure that we'll get back to that at some point. We'd like to sort of dive into. Oh no, my internet's not working. I was going to do something fun. We're going to dive into Ronald Reagan's speech now, but before that, so for those of you who are listening and not actually watching, the voice that you're hearing might sound a little bit like Monty Python's John Cleese, but it is in fact the Commander Culture with his helmet off, in the flesh, reacting to somebody saying, "What do you think of communists?" Right? So here we go.
Master dirty red scum! Kick him in the teeth where it hurts! Kill! 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 Filthy bastard commies! I hate him! I hate him! Ah! Ah!
And that is me on a good day. So hopefully you guys are able to hear that. I'm testing some of my new features here. StreamYard is very kind in delivering all kinds of improvements to my user experience, which is usually not a good thing, but this time it is, and I can play videos with an adequate amount of preparation. So yeah, smash the dirty red scum. That's about where I am at. Ronald Reagan was there too. Ronald Reagan gave the speech that we're going to be discussing over the next hour or so. And by the way, I hope that Jake Wilson has made it home safely. When you do, text us so that we know that you're still alive. The convention, I think it was the Republican National Convention where Barry Goldwater was running for president. It was what I would consider to be the high watermark of American conservatism, or maybe not rightism, but conservatism. Interestingly enough, Hillary Clinton, of all the scumbag, bottom suckers, was a campaign staffer for Barry Goldwater in 1964. That kind of disturbed me a little bit when I learned that. But anyway, I've highlighted, as you can see, if you can watch the stream, that'd be great. We've highlighted some stuff. Otherwise, we'll just be discussing it. Shall we just jump right in here, or did you want to preface it, Mr. Templar?
No, I think we can jump onto these specific highlighted points. I would also recommend you could just Google, Reagan's Time for Choosing speech. We'll get it towards the tail end of here, but there's a specific part where Reagan kind of hits. Well, we'll get there. We'll just get there. Let's just jump right in.
Yeah, and I'll add that. I'll you sent me a link over. I'll add that to the description when the broadcast posts. No longer live, but okay. So, and again, I'm going to keep bringing you guys back to this. This is 1964, right? Mm-hmm. When I think I said the Civil Rights Act of 65. It's the Civil Rights Act of 64. But so a lot of the things that we think of on the American right, as having gone wrong, went wrong in the 60s, in 64, in 65, in 69. But Ronald Reagan wrote this before all of that stuff had happened. All the stuff that we think of as, oh, this was really bad. He was already on top of this. And it wasn't just him if he's giving this at a national Republican convention. And I was reflecting on this with Templar before the stream. And I was thinking, the John Birch Society was stood up like 10 years before this for the same purpose that Ronald Reagan is talking here. That people were on to the game that's been happening to us. This didn't just sort of pop up one day. It's been a very long time coming. If you think about it too much in the wrong way, you might get discouraged that our enemy is so cunning.
I was going to say it's kind of a black pill that we've known about this for 50 plus years, and they continue to win. So I guess what the takeaway there is what we've been doing hasn't been working. So it might be time for a different way of thinking. But again, that's for another podcast.
That's for another podcast. We need to get our viewership up or our subscriptions up before we start going down those roads, so that when they ban us for going down those roads, we can
hop on Cozy TV.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So first of all, we here at the Commander Culture Channel talk about controversial things, and that's exactly how Roosevelt. That's how Reagan started out his speech. I'm going to talk about controversial things, and then he talked about some pretty bland boilerplate stuff for the first paragraph. But he said basically we are fighting the most dangerous enemy ever known to man. And Ronald Reagan was a showmanship, right? But he was also not a liar. He was somebody who, and that was why that was his appeal. He said what he meant, and he meant what he said. Now, I'm going to preface all of this with my own personal opinion that Ronald Reagan was a very good president, did quite approach great, had a lot of problems, had a lot of great successes. Those are discussions for another time, or, if you want to send stuff in the chat, we can talk about it. But here, in 1964, 10 years before he was president, he really hit the nail on the head. He said, we are fighting the most dangerous enemy ever known to man. If we lose that war, and in doing so lose our freedom, it has been said that history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening. Yeah. The guns are silent in this war, but frontiers fall when those who should be warriors prefer neutrality. And we can look at this, and we can, with the 50 years past, say that those. I am specifically astonished that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening. And, people blame the boomers a lot, but in 1964, the boomers were just coming of age, right? This was the greatest generation before that. These were the people who accidentally made the world safe for communism at the behest of the silent generation, who were handed an America that already had an income tax by whatever generation came before, the progressives or something. So this is a problem that does go all the way back, and it doesn't just rest with the boomers. It rests with these people who really had the most to lose, and they did the least to prevent the enemy from creeping in.
And it's not just the inaction that's a shocking part, because I don't think there's any shortage of people, especially at that time, who loved America and loved their country. But it's the inaction in the face of the absolute horrors, like worse than any of us can imagine, that had occurred. Like entire. Reagan was born 1911, and he's giving this speech in 1964. So he was alive during what I would argue were the worst horrors in human history occurring, specifically like Holodomor with communist Russia purging entire countries, 8 million people before the 6 million of the Nazis in World War II. There was the 8 million in Ukraine alone. There were other countries. Yeah, exactly.
How many million?
Of which one? It was 6 million. Exactly 6 million. Not one more, not one less. It was exactly 6 million. Okay, good. Yes. Good. Yeah. Yep.
We'll run those numbers after the stream.
Okay, good to go. Yep. Totally accurate. But before that, there were actually 8 million at least Ukrainians starved to death by the communists, and it wasn't just like, oh, you have no food, now you have to starve. Some of them resorted to cannibalism, but it was really just a purge of any means necessary. Food just happened to be one of the effective ways of doing it, but there were no shortage of mass graves, and Ukraine was not the only victim of communism. Basically, all the Eastern countries had similar holocausts imparted on them by the communists. And so, when you're looking at the evils in human history, staring at you right back in the face was something that had occurred within your lifetime. And then people like Reagan see the writing on the wall that the United States itself is heading in this direction. And the response from the general population is either a shrugging of the shoulders, maybe it's just pleading ignorance, maybe it's disbelief that no, America never would, or this could never happen in this country. Whatever the reasoning they use to return to their complacent way of life, they probably should have taken that a little more seriously, because it's, again, as we witnessed, the worst that human history has ever experienced, in the 20th century. So it's not like it was like, oh yeah, hundreds and thousands of years ago there was this really bad thing that happened. It was like, no, within our lifetime that we got to watch on TV, the worst human atrocities in human history were committed, and that is the reality that we're facing in this country. That's the crossroads that we're at, so to speak. But we're kind of just along for the ride, and that's not something with that where the stakes are that high is not something that you want to be along for the ride for. You need to fight like hell to pull the country in a different direction.
And I don't want to beat this dead horse too much. And I myself have never been in combat, but the excuse, if we'll use that word, is often made that, well, this is a generation like the World War I generation that saw the horrors of war and sort of wanted to retreat to it. That's the excuse we get as to why the boomers were spoiled and things like that. But here, here's something that I think a lot of people forget. We talk about the Holodomor. We talk about the Holocaust. We talk about the liquidation of the kulaks. We talk about the Great Leap Forward in China, where millions and millions and millions of people were killed. And one of the things that we sort of forget, and I'm going to mention it because it's germane to this discussion of Americans making these decisions, is that the Americans that were making these decisions, it had a hand in some of those exact same atrocities. And I refer specifically to the aerial bombardment of cities and starvation campaigns directed against the Axis powers. And so, they knew firsthand what the stakes were in letting this kind of thing get out of control. It was not academic. It wasn't like, oh, we're isolationist, and so we don't know what's doing over here, and we're just going to do a bunch of jazz and tap dancing, and, if it gets out of hand, it gets out of hand. And so I guess kudos to our enemies for figuring out how to psych those kind of people into the situation where we've come to. I want to talk about the next little line down. Ronald Reagan gives a little anecdote about some people talking with Cuban refugees, and the Americans are like, "Wow, you guys really were lucky." And the Cuban says, "What do you mean? What do you mean lucky?" He says, "We had some place to escape to." And Ronald Reagan says, "That's the point here. If the United States goes down, there's nowhere for anyone to escape to, right? We see this in, I'm going to just throw it out there and say that Australia and France, from the news I'm reading today, are despotic, psychotic tyrannies right now, where a country that was really about spreading democracy around the world would probably be mobilizing their troops to head to Paris and Canberra. But the United States has in part been captured. And so those countries don't have anywhere to look. And we here have the responsibility of restoring our the America that was, if we want to use a Firefly reference, right? Did you watch Firefly there, Templar?
No, I think you're good. Just the right amount.
No. Oh, okay. So there we go. Anyway, let me see. Oh, my little helmet's in the way there. He says, anyway. Okay. Great
Yeah,
thoughts on that first.
yeah,
page.
just we don't have somewhere to escape to. Usually, people of different nationality. If I were French, I'd be like, oh, I'm going to go to France. But if I'm a French person in France and my country has already fallen, like now where do you go? If you're a Jew, you go to Israel. Like, oh, hey, you're a Jew in Nazi Germany and you're being persecuted. Guess what? You have your own country. You can go to that. Same with any other ethnic origin. Japanese go to Japan. So if these countries fall, if your country of origin falls and is no longer a desirable place to be, you're essentially a homeless refugee, and that's not what you want to be. So it's in your best interest to make it so that your home country does not get to that point. So you should definitely be on the lookout for that.
And traditionally, those kind of people have come to America. And so where do we Americans go to? There's nowhere that's opening their arms up because there's no country is stupid enough to take in the flotsam of the world. But so we're going to have to essentially fight where we stand.
Yep.
Ronald Reagan makes a point later on. He says, I thought this was interesting. He said, today we're told that we must choose between the right or the left, or as others suggest, a third alternative. And that got my ears perked up. I said, a third way? What? He says, a safe middle ground. Oh, he's talking about moderatism. And he says, but there is no right or left. There's only an up or a down. An up to freedom and a down to totalitarianism, basically. And I'll tell you this is the Republican Party. I'm going to stomp on them again. I'm sorry. But
they deserve it. They deserve it.
They do. Those retarded bastards. I was giving a political speech and in front of a large number of Republican boosters. And I brought this up. They basically were talking about, the left, this person's too far right, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, you people are stupid. If you think, I didn't say that exactly because that would have really, ruffled their pearls. But I said, there's no right or left. There's only up or down on this axis now. You have totalitarianism going down and you have freedom going up. And I didn't know that Ronald Reagan was the first one to coin that, 50 years before I ever brought it up. But I feel better now knowing that he had. Yeah. And those people were complete idiots. They're like, no, we have to get rid of all the people on the left. And it's like, a lot of people on the left at this point in our nation's history can agree with us. People that were honest about Occupy Wall Street, or people who are, left-leaning libertarians, or, people who, not everybody wants totalitarianism, right? Even leftists. So it's just that's how you look at someone. Do you believe in freedom, or do you believe in crushing totalitarianism? The real destroyers, says Reagan, quoting Plutarch, is of the liberties of the people is he who spreads among them bounties, donations, and benefits. He basically says if the government tries to buy people off, that government is corrupt and a destroyer of the liberties of the people. They can call themselves a democracy, but they're a destroyer of liberties. He says there is an increasing number of people who today see a fat man standing beside a thin one without automatically, who can't see that, without coming to the conclusion that the fat man got that way by taking advantage of the thin one. And that's the opinion of 50% of the entire country. That's just communism, right? The profit motive is outmoded, said a television commentator that Reagan's quoting. The distribution of goods must be affected by a planned economy.
Yeah.
Holy crap. This is 1964, and you have talking heads saying the distribution of goods must be affected by a planned economy. No. What? Yeah. Why aren't they shooting these people?
Yeah. So when he says planned economy, that's what we had talked about this before in the planned economies of the and even in prior podcasts, you talk about the communist economic structure, which is it falls victim to the calculation problem of central economic planning, and so and then there's just various ways. A minimum wage is a way of planning an economy. You're manipulating what would otherwise be a natural process. So we've heard this planned economy thing before. We know it's stupid, and we know why it's stupid. But that never gets in the way of opportunistic people seeking power, still pitching it, and then like Plutarch said, the recipients of whatever bounties and donations that those politicians are handing out as a result of their planned economy, they're more than willing to put those people who desire that in power. And I think also what Reagan's alluding to here with the fat man, skinny man analogy is you hear a lot about income inequality, and I was more libertarian in previous days, and I despised. That was actually my capstone project in college was on income inequality, and we had some Canadian guy come talk to us, very credentialed, educated Canadian policy prescriber, come talk to us about income inequality and the Gini coefficients, and there's a couple other curves that are relevant there. But I despise these people because I was like, all income inequality is just people being mad that others are more successful than them, and the conclusion is Gibbs. They just want free stuff, and it's, on one hand I could see that being the case. On the other hand, I think what is causing such wide gap in the income inequality, unbeknownst to these leftists, is two things. One, the government handouts themselves. So companies like Tesla would not be making billions on billions if they weren't getting billions and billions in government contracts. If they were a private company that had to compete naturally for the people's dollars, there would not be such a significant gap between the CEOs of that company and the laborers who work in it. And so there's one exacerbating factor of income inequality. And then there's also the aspect of the government incentivizing, low IQ third world wage slaves to flood the country, thus driving down the price of labor on the low end of the income spectrum. And so the scenario you now have is, CEOs getting handouts from governments to the tunes of billions of dollars, combined with the actual workers themselves having their wages slashed by an influx of the supply of labor. And it's creating a scenario where income inequality is actually being exacerbated. And if you framed that to a leftist, they would go, "Oh, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. We want more immigrants." And it's just so stupid. It's not actually about anything, but when it's
or a
described
libertarian.
like that, yeah, exactly, yeah. And but under those circumstances, I could see the income inequality being a problem because it's artificial. It's artificial. It's unnatural, and it's artificially high. And yeah, if I'm working a wage job and there's some CEO who's a billionaire because he convinced a politician to give his money, there's a problem with that. And then you do have a right to be angry there. And so that I just want to temper Reagan's analogy of fat man, skinny man there with, hey, you might see a fat man and a skinny man on the streets today. It's still continuing with the analogy, but like that fat guy is fat because of the handout he got from the government, and that skinny guy is skinny because his wages are being undercut by government policies. So that might actually be a righteous anger in this day and age. Whereas, before the Hart-Celler Act, before maybe as many government contracts are being handed out as with so many dollars, maybe that, people were just mad because others were more successful than them. But today that might actually be a righteous issue to champion against. And the left would agree, just for the wrong reasons.
Well, yeah, I mean that this whole analogy was one reason why communism found the root so hard to take in the United States, because nobody would buy the fact that somebody else is taking advantage of someone else, because all you have to do is move somewhere else, get a better job, work harder, put in more hours, come up with something a little smarter, pool your money, whatever it was, and you could get ahead. And so communism is like, people are like, no, that's stupid. But like you said, once they started, it's this twin force of importing third world slave labor into the United States and exporting the jobs that had previously been had to other third world slave labor countries. And you can't even work at a kitchen in Denny's, because you lost your factory job to Mexico, and now you lost your kitchen job to a Honduran. Right. Well, what are you supposed to do? And of course, you're going to see people getting richer and richer, just like you said. And so there's this. There was at least I think for every person observing it, it was a little bit different. For me, like the Occupy Wall Street movement was the point at which I stopped thinking in my head, these stupid, dirty hippies, and I started thinking, maybe there's an actual point here. And I don't know if that coincided with like me starting to earn more money or me observing the local economies as they worked. But it was like, it's just like you said. Yeah, in an unbalanced economy, you could say like the Soviet Union. Jake Wilson here says we have a planned economy. You're working as a debt slave so corporations can get rich and buy off government officials. And that's exactly what's happening. And so in that sense, just like you said, government policy impoverishes the hard workers. At the same time, it bleeds their taxes dry. And it empowers the looting of the economy. So what we have, maybe I postulate, is not so much the Soviet Union like in 1922, but what we have is the post-Soviet Union in like 1995, when robber barons were just selling out the assets of the country, and everyone was drinking themselves into a coma. And maybe we're there. The hour is already late, says Reagan. Government has laid its hands on healthcare, housing, farming, industry, commerce, education, and to an ever-increasing degree, it interferes with the people's right to know. This is in 1964, people.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That is crazy. He was not being hyperbolic. He was speaking to an entire half of the country. America was much more Republican in 1964 than it is now by Republican conservative tenets. He says that the full power of a centralized government was the very thing that the founding fathers sought to minimize. You can't control the economy without controlling the people first. And so Ronald Reagan says we've now come to a time for choosing. And so it's very sobering to realize that in 1964 he was saying our healthcare is in danger of being sucked down a black hole. Our housing situation is in danger, we could say our urban situation is in danger of being sucked down a black hole. Farming, industry, which doesn't exist anymore in America, commerce, education, which doesn't exist anymore in America, and to an ever-increasing degree interferes with the people's right to even know. Thoughts?
I mean, I think we're aware of all the examples of how those are manifesting themselves today. I'd be a little curious to see what specifically he was referring to in that day and age, and I can only imagine what he would say if we could show him or describe to him the kind of policies and bureaucracies that exist today. And it makes you wonder as well, if all of those guys who were getting shipped off to Europe to fight in the war would have kind of turned around and fought some of the enemies of their homeland too, if they realized what it would have become.
Yeah, I don't think that they would have fought against, the evil Nazi empire if they knew that they were fighting for the globalist American empire.
Yeah.
I most certainly do not think so. At least not the ones that I've talked to. It's a very sad sort of a thing. We'll move on through the speech here. I just want to point something out real interestingly, just because I've been reading about it. He actually starts mentioning the Tennessee Valley Authority, which, if you don't know the whole history, I'm going to restrain myself from going into the history of it. But it was a Roosevelt program that was basically kind of a socialist wet dream. But he says, and because this intersects here with today, where they're talking about energy policy and all this kind of idiotic nonsense. He says, I will point out to you that the Tennessee Valley Authority which generated electricity for the central part of the United States, gets its electric power from the impounded waters. This is true. But today, 85% of the TVA's electricity is generated in coal burning plants. He says the labor and so the whole reason was to A, get people back to work, and B, to create clean energy. So already it failed at creating clean energy because it was coal burning plants, and people are like, well, it created navigable waterways and blah blah blah. And he's like, yeah, they just use those navigable waterways to move coal up to the plants that are generating the power that the waterways are not. And it was also supposed to create jobs. However, Reagan says the Labor Department lists 50% of the 169 countries in the TVA as permanent areas of poverty, distress, and unemployment. And so that's your government track record back in the halcyon days of the United States, when 50% of the 169 countries that it was supposed to help to the tune of billions of
Counties.
dollars.
Counties.
Counties, I'm sorry. What did I say?
Countries.
Countries? Oh, my bad.
I made those. Yeah.
Yeah, as permanent areas of poverty, distress, and unemployment. And if you go to those areas now, they're even worse than they were back then because the coal burning plants that those countries depended on, so they closed down. Either the mines closed down or the coal plants closed down. We've got lots of coal in the ground. We know how to burn it cleanly, but we're not allowed to. And so these places stay in poverty, quote, distress, quote, and unemployment, quote. They said basically, what did he say? Public interest is now anything that a few planners decide that it should be. And that's something that the Nazis would have been comfortable with. That's something that the Soviets or the Maoist Chinese would be comfortable with. And that was again in 1964, coming off of, Eisenhower and Kennedy, right? Thoughts? Sorry.
No, everything is dumb and gay.
It is dumb, and it is especially gay in the gay.
Mm-hmm.
The globalist American empire is very dumb.
And it's been that way for a long time, apparently.
Apparently it has. And that's kind of, I'm a history guy, but to see the primary documents, as they call them, like up close and personal and go like, wow, this was really crap back then too. Jake Wilson even is as shocked and surprised as we are that a government entity failed at its stated purpose. Here's another one. In the area of social welfare, the government has found its most fertile growing bed, says Reagan. So many of us accept our responsibility for those less fortunate, and even we are susceptible to humanitarian appeals. This is a way that the government ended up getting Americans, because Americans are the most giving people in the world when it comes to social welfare. Most of the nonprofit donations come from Americans that go out to the world and ourselves. And the government said, oh, well, all you have to do is pay a little bit more, right? Here's some fun facts given to us by Reagan in 1964. If this present welfare spending was prorated equally among the poverty-stricken families, we could give each family more than $4,500 a year, which was a lot. He said, but actually direct aid to the poor averages less than $600 a family. So that's, that's pretty bad. That's like a negative 7 times return on that. Yeah. The more I read about Eisenhower, Jake, the less sort of peachy I am on him as a president. I've never had a high opinion of him as a general, especially if you read all that stuff about D-Day where he's like, well, I'm going to write my failure speech now. He was kind of a placeholder. He was a minor Reagan, I guess. He kept us from going further than we could have gone. But he didn't step up to the task, and certainly didn't ensure that his replacement got to where he was supposed to go. He says, what if through these dollars we somehow, by some magic, end poverty? He said, all that we have is more plans, and the more the plans fail, the more the planners plan. This is a direct quote. I loved it.
Back to Soviet Russia as well. They had tons of bureaucrats whose job was allocate resources like manually, and it was just like a whole bunch of people ruining the economy. And the best thing for the economy would have just been to stop all those people from planning and get them away from the levers of power.
Yeah, it's the classic, price controls don't work sort of thing. Are you referring? Yeah. The one that always gets me is like when they were pouring out milk during the Great Depression.
Yeah, they would all smashing fruit, just hitting oranges with baseball bats to drive the price up. It's just bro, it's the Depression.
People are starving to death. I tell you. They had welfare moms back in 1964, believe it or not. He gives this charming story of this lady who went to court, said, "I want to divorce my husband," and the judge is like, "Well, this doesn't make any sense, and your husband doesn't want to divorce you." This was before no fault divorces cursed our country. And the poor guy, was a day laborer earning $250 a month, and she's like, "Well, if I divorced him, I could get $80 more. I'm eligible for $350 a month from the government, from Uncle Sugar, and two of my friends have already gotten divorced, and they're getting $350. So, Ronald Reagan's like, "This is stupid." But anytime, he said, we question the schemes of do-gooders, we are denounced as being opposed to their humanitarian goal, right? Which is absolutely idiotic. Do not allow yourself to ever be shamed into feeling that you're not doing enough, because I can guarantee you, if you think about it, you do enough. You help the old lady shovel her porch. You help out, babysitting your nephews. I mean, you do stuff. You send money to the church or whatever it is you do. And Uncle Sugar and these progressives come in and try to wedge your emotions away from your pocketbook.
They will accuse you of being opposed to their intent. They're always, why? What does this policy do? Oh, well, it ends poverty in America. And it's like, no, what you're really doing is you're artificially manipulating the wage, and then in your pea brain, you're either so stupid that you think this is actually happening, or you just understand that it doesn't do anything, but it'll get people to vote for you. You're either so stupid that you're a danger to society, or what you're doing and you're just a bad person. This is the leftist, and then you say, hey, maybe this actually isn't a good idea because I don't think it's achieving the desired outcome, and then they come back with, oh, well, you must hate poor people, and it's these bad faith attacks on your character. And it's not worth arguing with leftists. It's not. And now they've moved on from like, you hate poor people to like, you hate blacks, or you hate Jews, or you hate women, or whatever. It's shifted from class in terms of income to class in terms of demographics. And so it's just not worth entertaining. Somebody calls you racist, your response would be, "But am I wrong?" And it's just or anti-Semitic. You always see these articles. So and so is anti-Semitic. It's like, okay, but is he wrong? And it doesn't matter, because they're always going to hit you with that, and it's not addressing the argument. It's just a character attack, and they should be the ones on the defense having to justify their stupid policy position. But yeah, it's not even worth it.
Right. Well, and I want to point out too that if it's like the normies or whatever, or the libtards that you're talking to, there's like a psychosomatic bonus to this. Like, they actually get a dopamine rush from pretending that they're helping. Like, these people, I'm not even joking.
They can't help in an actual way, so they need to, like you said, pretend that they are, and to feel good about themselves. Yeah,
or they don't want to. They don't have the strength of character to actually go down and hand out stuff at the soup kitchen. I mean, the inspiration for part of the inspiration for this channel was a lovely British fellow who might be listening, named Mr. Brown, who broadcasts frequently on cultural issues. And half of the time I can't get a hold of him, because what is he doing? He's down at a homeless shelter in merry old England, helping out people that are less fortunate than himself. Nobody asked him to do that. Right? He just got up one day and said, "You know what? This is what I'm going to do." And millions upon millions upon millions of people do that every single day. And those are the people that are being guilted. Those are the people who are being told that they're, deplorables.
The people who can feel guilt for basically other people's feelings. Like, it's only the good people that are falling victim to these bad faith arguments, and it's the scum of the earth that are the ones lobbing these bad faith arguments at them. And it's sad to see.
There's no better proof than this fiasco that happened with the Salvation Army, where they're like, "Oh my gosh, we don't want white people donating to us because we're racist," and so people like us, deplorables, who were very happy to drop a dime or more into the little jingle bell boxes in front of Target are like, nope, we're not going to do that this year. Nobody of our spirit donated, and the entire
And we were the
structure of
only
the
people
Salvation
that
Army
were
collapsed.
donating.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. The woke tards didn't give a crap because they're psychopaths. The mask Karens couldn't virtue signal and get their dopamine rush from putting on another mask and uploading it to Instagram. There you go.
You can extrapolate that one example to literally any other aspect of society. If there's something you don't like about society, all you have to do as a good person and as a tax-paying citizen is just check out from that specific system, and it will collapse. Because if you're listening to this, you're probably a productive, upstanding individual, and there's the number of you in society are few and far between. So anywhere where you good people take your services elsewhere, I can almost guarantee you that whatever that company or whatever that organization is that's, persecuting you and still expecting you to contribute with a smile on your face, it will collapse. So this all ends when we say it does. We just gotta build that parallel economy.
Yep,
You can't survive without it.
Yeah,
and don't
and people
feel
are
guilt.
already
No white guilt doesn't exist. Don't play into that. It's trash.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all around, no right guilt.
Yeah, no right guilt.
And I like that. I should put that on a shirt. No right guilt. It's you just walk up to them and you say, "Good day, sir." Right? I was at the shopping market with my significant other the other day, and it took us an extra half an hour to figure out what products we were boycotting. She's like, "Wait, are we allowed to buy this? Wait, is this company located this? Wait, is Procter and Gamble? Is Gillette?" Blah, blah. And we're like going through this stuff, but guess what? We stuck to our principles. We've barely drinking a Coke, since that whole scandal happened. It's just we've said good day, sir, and that is about that. Speaking of the stupid libtards and the normies and the wokesters and the SJWs, Reagan had it first. This is a quote that I've always loved. I didn't know it came from this speech. He says, "It isn't so much that liberals are ignorant; it's just that they know so much that isn't so." I thought, oh, that's brilliant. So
I think a lot. I think there's two. I think half of them know what they're doing and are just opportunistic and know that they can benefit from it, and the other half of them are stupid and just get a dopamine rush, but don't even know exactly what they're advocating for. They just know that they are hailed as a good person by their like-minded friends for holding whatever beliefs they are, but it doesn't even matter what they are or how much sense they make. It's just they're just drones. They're just the NPCs.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's half and half. I think half of them do know what they're doing. They just know that they could personally benefit from it.
See, I'm not entirely sure. I think that the number of deluded people is much higher. I know some very smart people in my family who, they're smart. They're very well accomplished professional class people, as Jake is talking about, and they just don't. I mean, they're brainwashed. Like somebody out of a Manchurian Candidate program or something like that. It's like, how in the world does your brain function enough to tie shoes and like put food in your mouth, and you're not understanding this? It's like, I trust the science. What science? The science on vaccines. Oh, what does the science say about mRNA vaccines? And then they cite something and you're like, oh, well, that's not either real science or that doesn't address the concerns that people have about it. And it's like their brains just go. It's like the flat earth, right? Where it's like, here there be dragons. Their brain just goes to a certain point and then drops off the edge, turtles all the way down.
At the same time, I think those same people are just kind of going along with whatever the zeitgeist of the current times is. So I'm pretty sure if the right got into power and started marching along in their direction, those same useful idiots or useful smart people who are actually idiots, all those people would just fall in step, the same as anyone else. They just take on the beliefs of society around them, and then their intelligence is dedicated to whatever their specific field is, because there's plenty of doctors and engineers who probably have high IQs but are totally out of step with reality when it comes to the world around them and the politics and everything. So those people just probably take on the beliefs of the zeitgeist.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. That the middle, third or whatever will just automatically swing to whatever the zeitgeist is. And with those high IQ type people, I think I'll just speak to this really briefly because it's something close to my heart. Is that if you're a really smart person, like a doctor, maybe, the people around you, for the most part, are actual idiots most of the time, and so you kind of develop a I don't know what you want to call it, a psychosis or a delusion or something, that you're smarter than you are. It's kind of a Dunning-Kruger situation where then when you encounter people who are smarter or ideas that differ from your rationalizations, you write them off. Yeah, because you're like, well, that's stupid because everything else everyone said is stupid. And so it's stupid. And then you just, run around like a prick all day long, But I'm more with Jake Wilson, where he's saying only about 10% know and do it anyway. The rest are just, they're really dumb. But again, that might be me being, the Dunning-Kruger
maybe
type
you're
thing.
the victim of that. No,
But that's why I always have to.
People on the right can, I think, fall victim of that, because you have to constantly be sanity checking yourself and constantly reevaluating your own beliefs, because you're forced to, because everything in society flies in the face of it. And you can't be an NPC and be on the right because the programming literally tells you not to be. Because
also the right is reality based, whereas the left is utopia based.
Yeah.
And if you're based in reality, you have to consistently check reality to make sure that you're aligned with it. Whereas if you're utopia based, you have to consistently check with the narrative. And, so anyway, I don't know, Jake. I think that maybe people 120 and under all the way down shouldn't vote. I wouldn't reinstate the franchise at 89 IQ, but that's just me. Speaking of other things I would do away with, here's a big problem I've got with Ronald Reagan. He says, we have accepted Social Security as a step towards meeting the problem of unemployment in old age. I don't know. I would abolish Social Security tomorrow. I think that it's extractive. I think that it is broken.
Wait, no. His point with that was that's the reason that they gave, and then he follows that up with, however. Okay. I see where he's going with this article. Is that he says that the premise of Social Security is good, but it's being mismanaged,
misused. Whereas I would say that the premise is bad.
Yes.
And here's why. I'll tell you all why very, very quickly, and you can tell me if you disagree or if you think about it this way. It is the same exact situation, and darn Ronald Reagan for not figuring it out, as the paragraph above where he talks about the welfare mother. If you are such a shite parent that your kids are not going to take care of you in old age, and if you're such a shite worker, and your fiscal responsibility is that crummy that you need to rely on a pittance to make ends meet when you retire, maybe old age should take care of you. I mean, that's kind of harsh, but that's what the church is for. That's what social organizations are for. If you're one of those people who absolutely just completely fell through the cracks because you didn't form a family, you formed a family poorly, you're a dumb idiot who doesn't know how to handle money, or you're a lazy bum who doesn't know how to work in the 40 years of your working career, then there are still organizations that will come and pick you up and make you whole without ever having to get Social Security involved. When you involve Social Security, what do you get? I'll tell you exactly what you get. You get the boomers. You get an entitled generation of people who say, F it, I don't care what the consequences are. I'm going to follow, cockamamie, dangerous salute suggestions and pop psychology as I raise my kid, or just have the state raise them, and then I'm gonna gaily skip off into the sunset with a margarita and a cruise for the rest of my life because I've got Social Security. We've seen the bumper stickers where it's like, I'm spending my Social Security checks on this Escalade or whatever, and it's like it encourages irresponsibility, the same as the welfare queen.
Yep. And to make the economic argument against Social Security, I don't have the actual numbers in front of me, but if you take all of the money that you pay into Social Security, you just put that in, SPY, just the S&P 500, you'll have 3 times as much money at the end of your life than you would collecting all of your Social Security checks on average. And then on top of that, it's actually a regressive system where poor people tend to not live as long as rich people, and so towards the end of their life, it's racism. But the result is that rich people have a more time. More well-off people have more time to collect Social Security checks than the poor people who was originally intended for. So there's a lot of economic reasons why it's just a bad idea. And at the end of the day, I can't think of any good ideas on why you would have a Social Security system.
Except for, if you have a bunch of, if you're worried about unemployment in old age, which was never a problem in the United States.
Well, no, because even if you are worried about those things, you will be better off putting all of the money that would normally get taken out from Social Security. If you took that money and you put it in the market instead, you would have more money by the time you went to retire than you would from your average Social Security check. So it's not even from a dollar's perspective, like we're better off without it financially and literally any other way you can think of.
And as I think about it, the Great Depression wasn't exactly a decimation of the retired. It was a decimation of the working class. If you were retired, you basically just did the same thing that you always did. Maybe you lost your stock portfolio if you were a high end person, but if you were just grandma, cooking soup for the little kids and watching them while parents went off to work, your life didn't really change at all. So I don't even know where this crap came. Well, it came from socialist retardery under Roosevelt. But, the thing I want to talk about this. Oh, yeah, Jake says they arrested Bernie Madoff, but he was just practicing Social Security in the private sector. And this is a true statement. Here's what Reagan says next. He says, appearing before a congressional committee, the congressional committee admitted that Social Security is today $298 billion in the red. That was 1964. And they were almost $300 billion in the red. And I found that blew me away because as we all know, we sit here listening to the Commander Culture broadcast, like, share, and subscribe. And we know that the Social Security system is going to give out within 5 to 10 years.
Today they are 2.6 trillion in the red.
2.6 trillion. The difference between 300 billion and 2.6 trillion is like the difference between a jump shot and a moonshot. We are so far behind. The only way they're going to get out of this is inflation. We all know that. I would defer to your economic expertise, but I'm going to say that's how we get out of Social Security bogs. That's how we get out of the debt, the national debt that we owe. It's just like, oh, well, we have a $250 billion coin in this Federal Reserve, so all of our debts are forgiven. Neener. And I think that's what
I don't really have a good answer for you because the modern monetary policy doesn't concern itself with paying back debt. So there isn't a whole lot of time that economists spend on how to do that in an effective way. It's usually the real answer is just collapse. That's what happens. That's the only way that debt clocks are reset is not by a responsible individual taking power. It's really just hitting the hardest reset you can imagine. Talk about the Great Reset. Well, there's your Great Reset.
Yeah, which go back to one of our first podcasts our broadcasts where we talked about how to kind of protect yourself a little bit, maybe get a little bit of gold, a little bit of silver, a little bit of productive land, a little bit of Bitcoin even, get some extra job skills that you can shop around to feed yourself. But they don't care about the consequences. They're just building the tallest Jenga that they can and taking a sledgehammer to it as they do. Yeah, it's like the good old Joe Stalin quote where he says, one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. And once you get to 1 billion or 1 trillion in terms of numbers, people's eyes just glaze over and they're like, oh yeah, it's like 1 billion or something. I think doesn't Elon Musk have that? And then you're like, oh yeah, okay, well, if it's a mess. It is a mess. The gist of all of this stuff, regardless of whether it's Social Security or whether it's the welfare queens, Ronald Reagan says He says, we are forcing all of our citizens into compulsory government programs regardless of needs. He's specifically talking here about medical stuff, but in general, right? He says he points out that for the money that they spent on a juvenile delinquency program, they could have sent the juvenile delinquents to Harvard and saved half the cost. And he says, I'm not suggesting Harvard is the answer to juvenile delinquency, but we all know nowadays that Harvard is, of course, the answer to juvenile delinquency, and we send a bunch of unqualified semi-retards into our establishments of higher learning, where I'm being kind. I'm feeling generous today.
Very well.
But and I think that the smart people now are even avoiding colleges or institutions of higher learning altogether. I'm at a loss, frankly, for what we might want to do another stream about this, but of what to suggest to Zoomers, and you're much closer to them than I am, but I have daily interactions with them. What do you tell somebody when they're like, I want to go to college? At this point, what I'm saying is
find a mentor. I'd say find a mentor, because I mean, it's the same thing. You learn a skill, but you need inroads into that community. You can learn a skill off the internet. You can, but you need access to a mentor, essentially.
Well, I'm specifically talking, not to cut you off, I'm sorry, but that's the best way to do it. But the thing is, it's like these kids are so programmed, like have to go to college, and I understand the programming. I was there. It never occurred to me that I didn't want to go to college, but I'm kind of an intellectual, so it's like, but if you go to college because you're brainwashed that you have to go to college, it's like, well, if I say don't go to college, learn a skill, go, become a logger, become an offshore drill, welder or something, you'll make $1 billion. But it's like, if they say, well, I have to go to college, I'm like, okay, go to college and learn a practical skill, right? Don't study something like history. Don't study something like, go to school to become a nurse,
an engineer.
Go to school to become an engineer, go to school to learn a foreign language, go to school to become an actuarial, right? Or an accountant or something, a skill that you have to spend so many years building up, because otherwise your money is completely tossed away. I can tell you, as a holder of several prestigious history degrees, I could have easily gotten the same knowledge at my public library, and by tracking down a few of those professors after class and just being like, oh, professor, tell me all this great stuff. And they talk your ear off. They don't have to take the check. Anyway, Jake, we're with you, Jake. If she does want to go to college, by the way, Jake Wilson, if you can't read his chat, he says, I'm trying to convince my oldest daughter not to go to college. You start out life $100,000 in debt. And it's like, if you can, hopefully we pray that you're successful. If you can't, go with my advice, learn something practical, right? Not everyone's cut out to be an engineer.
Just
not everyone's cut out to be
go to a community
nurse.
college so you're not shelling out tens of thousands of dollars a year. It's only a couple thousands of dollars a year. And then there's also not the degeneracy seeking to drag your child down to hell, turn their hair blue, and get them addicted to anything, and also disease-ridden, STDs or whatever. Like, you can do away with all of that, and then still get a piece of paper that says, I have a degree in X, and then take that to some employer, and they'll hire you. Doesn't matter as long as your grades are semi-decent. So just go to community college. I don't understand this whole, because it's part of the programming, like you had mentioned. You got to go off. This is like you're coming of age. You're going to find yourself, and in reality, all it is an overpriced daycare with a rock climbing wall, and it's just not good for your development even. And I just don't see how anyone could go into the 4-year college pipeline and come out the other end actually a better person, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I don't see it. Stay close to home, go to your community college, work an actual job while you're doing that, and then you will be much better off, because you're not going to learn a thing in college.
Well,
you're going to waste a lot of time and money.
Here's something that Reagan didn't really anticipate but it fits in with the same theme that he was talking about here. kids are, because it used to be in the old days, like Jake could tell his daughter, he could say, sorry, sweetheart, I'm not paying for that. And then she's like, oh, what'll I do? And it's like, then she'd be in a real pickle. But now all she has to do is just type up federal loans, and boom, she's got $100,000 in her pocket, and she can go off and discover herself, at a 4-year university, because they'll accept any old idiot, no matter how smart or not you are, and they'll take your money, the money that comes freely, but then you pay on the other end, right? And so that's separating, like they separated husband from wife earlier. They separate the old from the young with Social Security. Now they're separating parent from child with this free money to 17 and 18-year-olds who really, bless their souls, don't have a full appreciation of just how much damage they're doing to their future status. They are becoming the wage slaves that Jake mentioned, to up above. And it's sad.
Yeah, and not speaking to you directly, Jake, but like anyone who has a daughter, why are they going to college? The best thing that could come from your daughter going to college is she finds a husband that wants to marry her, that is a good and upstanding, productive individual. Like the degree for a female is completely irrelevant unless you want them to just be barren cogs in the machine, which no female wants, whether they tell you that's the case or not. The best thing that a female can do going to college is find her husband. Honestly, that's the only utility whatsoever. And even under those circumstances, I don't know if you're going to find your soulmate, 9 shots deep at some college bar somewhere. You're probably better off finding it in like your local church or something. So again, I don't see the utility there, but if there were utility for a female to go to college, sole utility would be for the purpose of finding, investing in a man who will help provide for her so she can raise her children.
And I'm going to take this opportunity to shill. They're not an advertiser of the show, but there's a great site called White Date. I think whitedate.net, which is run out of Europe. And it's very good. I'm on a first name basis with the manager, the owner of the site. It's a female, and her goal is to help Western women hook up with Western men. And she can't vouch for the quality of all.
Get together, not literally hook up, presumably.
No. Okay, yeah, wrong term. Marriage, love, marriage, baby carriage. She even publishes on her website, like each time that somebody from her site reports that they got married or that they had a baby, like a White Date baby. And there have been some already. The website's been up a year or two, but it's an excellent place because. Awesome. So I found this. There was this great meme the other day where it's like trad men say, look for men or look for ladies at my local church. And then it says the ladies at my local church, and there's like the Golden Girls, and it's like, not every church is dynamic, and it might be kind of hard to find that. So online dating is a legitimate way to find the person that you're going to connect with. And I will always shill for whitedate.net. I think Cherie did last week or last time around either. Anyway, we're really big fans, and it's run as good as anything can be. So they need as many women as they can get on there. Obviously, there's a ratio of women to men. So your daughter would have a lot of people to choose from. We're talking awesome. Here to Jake. So yeah, it is. Well, anyway, and it's community too. Like we could probably even set up our channel over there. Anyway. We'll talk about that offline. 2/3 majority. Oh, so here now he's railing against the United Nations. I love this guy. He just goes from bam to bam to bam. He says, we are against subordinating American interests to an organization so structurally unsound that a 2/3 majority can be mustered in the UN General Assembly among nations representing less than 10% of the world population. So yeah, when Trinidad and Tobago have the exact same number of ambassadors to the UN as the United States and the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China, you're going to have problems. And unfortunately, the United States was too incompetent to properly bribe, shall we say, these members of small, less populated countries. But the People's Republic of China is getting very good at it. And so were the Soviets before them. And so the United Nations works against American interests, which, speaking of working against American interests, he talks about foreign aid. Here's another fun one. We are against doling out money, government to government, which can end up financing socialism all over the world. And he goes into these great examples of waste, fraud, and abuse that that American foreign aid is propping up. Ron Paul talks a lot about that. But he says we're now helping 107 countries across the world. And I think that you agree with me, Templar, that foreign aid should be ended immediately. And all of that money, applied to the debt or the
literally doesn't matter. Just don't even. It's like what do you, if you put out a forest fire, what do you replace it with? It's like nothing. Okay, just get rid of it. That's it.
A smaller forest fire.
No, yeah, no, just stop. Okay, stop giving other people the money of your citizens. Just stop.
I agree, and he says Congress says that if you move to cut foreign aid, everyone screams that if you cut $1, it's endangering national security. Of course, that's not true. And he goes into this great story where one of the leading intellectuals of the '60s was talking to the Prime Minister of Lebanon. Lebanon, the Prime Minister bragged, had no public debt, no inflation, a modest tax rate, increasing gold holdings. And the American says, well, we haven't balanced our budget in 28 over the last 40 years. The country is in greater debt than the combined debt of all the nations of the world. And that was in 64, folks. We have inflation. We have a tax rate that takes from the private sector a percentage of income greater than any civilized nation has ever taken and survived. And we have lost gold at such a rate that the solvency of our currency is in danger. Do you think that my country should keep giving you millions of dollars a year? And the Prime Minister smiled and says, no, but if you're foolish enough to keep doing so, we'll keep on taking the money. And this is the same with every single country. America is a chump.
And aid to Israel as well. They're included in that.
Oh, sure. Every country. They're one of the 107 or more now. We literally just hand out money like a drunken sailor, and it's sick. This is again where he talks about the gold reserves. I don't want to get too deep into that, but we need to be increasing our gold reserves. Oh, and we also need to audit them, says Ron Paul, the Ron Paul in me, the little Ron Paul on my shoulder. We did not have a balanced. We had a negative balance of gold in 1964, according to Reagan, and we haven't audited it since then. So if you think that the dollar is backed up by anything, it is not. And if you think that there's any gold that the United States has, when you look at like how much gold China has and Russia and France and all these other ones, we do not have that money. As they say in South Park, and it's gone.
It's gone.
It's gone. This is the speech where Reagan comes up with his excellent quote: "A government agency is the nearest thing to eternal life that we'll ever see on this earth," and it's true. Apparently, in 1964, the agencies coming under the executive branch, just in the register to list them, was 520 pages, and that was 1964. Now you couldn't even read all of it, probably. Geez, he's got some.
He's got another quote. There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program.
I like that one too. Right. Tyranny inevitably follows when this permanent structure, the deep state, usurps the policy-making function that belonged to elected officials. Yeah, and we saw this in our last election.
So that one hurts. That's a black pill right there, because you're like, there it is. We're the victim of what he's describing, and it hurts doubly so because he was putting out the warning signs to a much more receptive populace, and it's just like, what do we even do now? What do we even do now?
A pre-Hart Celler populace. Yeah. And he says here it's permanent, right? And nowhere in the speech does he say how you remove this permanent tyrannical bureaucracy, which itself is sobering.
And as it says below there, has no regard for constitutional freedoms. It's just a bureaucratic entity obsessed with expanding its own interests. which
under
is
bureaucratic.
yeah.
Under bureaucratic regulations adopted with no regard for the wish of the people, we have lost much of our constitutional freedom, and that was in 1964. In 1964, Ronald Reagan was saying we had lost much of our constitutional freedom. Where do we think we're at today?
Yeah.
You know,
He says, if you're not checked out yet, and when I say checked out, I don't mean like, I don't know, not like becoming a domestic terrorist or anything. It's checked out as in like you're on a sinking ship, like hop on a boat, carve out a section of the states yourself to make it the society you actually want to live in. But you really gotta any dependency you have on that is, you know, that depends on the infrastructure or existence of the United States. You know, if there's like grocery stores or the power grid, like anything that you rely on, anything that you rely on, which subsequently relies on the solvency of a U.S. government, like you gotta stop that right now. And I'm in the same boat as a lot of other people. Like I'm still dependent on a lot of these things. You got to insulate yourself from these organizations, because you're one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to collapse and you're going to find yourself among the starving hordes looking to, you know, kill people for food for your family, or you're going to become one of the drones who can't say no to a vaccine, or worse, because, you know, they're lauding food over your head and your options are starve to death or do what the government says. Either scenario seems particularly unideal. So honestly, like, and this hurts the most because the boomers are the ones who have like those fat 401ks that they're just sitting on and spending them on cruise ships when they could be, you know, saving generations of their children and their children's children. But they're just squandering it because they don't see any reason why their kids can't be as selfish as they are and indulge in all of these excesses. And you know, it's a blessing and a curse to be growing up if you're a Zoomer in modern America, because you're probably going to have it worse than many previous American generations.
All previous generations.
Yes, but congratulations, you have the opportunity to break away, kind of like a domestic, an abusive relationship. You have the opportunity now to set the record straight before you become too dependent on this system and walk away. And it's way easy. It's way easier said than done. I understand that, especially since, you know, we didn't grow up in an Amish community. We don't have those skills. Our parents did not confer a kind of mindset and work life that would make somebody, you know, this kind of lifestyle viable for someone. So I understand it's difficult. I can't emphasize this enough. I'm basically pleading with you, if you value your own self-preservation and that of your family and your children, you gotta walk away. And we can have we actually did do a podcast on what that looks like financially, all the different ways that you can kind of break away from this system. So please, I'm begging you, take steps to walk away.
And I'll add too, you know, you don't walk away into, you know, an ether and just sort of disappear. You walk away from a destructive community and you walk towards a constructive community. And that's part of what Templar and I are building here. Templar and I are part of larger communities on social media and in person, other places. You know, you find your community, you find your people, you find your tribe, as it were, and that will close the gaps. There's a lot of things that I can do that Templar can't do. There's a lot of things that Templar can do that I can't do. There's a lot of things that people we know can do them that we can't do them. And so if we work together, we create a whole. You know, when in your medieval village, you didn't have everyone being a blacksmith. You didn't have everyone being a master hunter. You didn't have everyone being the bridge builder, you know, or the cobbler. You had one or two people doing that, and everyone else relied on that person's expertise. And so, like you said, seek out people, a mentor, and come together as a group. Yeah, Jake Wilson, you're on Social Galactic. Excellent. That's one of my big groups. I love the people there. Gab is another good one. I'm hearing bad things about Getter, which, by the way, sounds kind of like a homosexual hookup app. I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
but I'm
Getter
staying away from
sucks.
it.
No, Getter sucks. They've already taken on ban terms of service that resemble Twitter. They arbitrarily ban people who they disagree with. It's bad. It's just an entity. Like, why attach yourself to a company that's in bed with all these same people and implementing all the same controls that you're probably getting on Getter because you were either banned from Twitter or you fear a ban from Twitter, and you would just be like walking into the arms of an equally abusive, crappy, less efficient company.
Or you're a parlor tard or something.
Yeah, no, just get on Gab. Just get on Gab.
Just get on Gab. Just do it.
Yeah.
Do it.
And when you also when you walk away from society, you're going to experience some inconveniences. You're not maybe your lights aren't always going to come on, or you're not going to have gallons of milk in your fridge, or you're not going to be able to buy a Subway sandwich or something like that. Like, there are modern conveniences that you're going to sacrifice, but it's better to rip that Band-Aid off now and kind of hit that reset. Then it'll be much more difficult later on.
Well, yeah, like they're already saying, we're going to try to ban people from shopping and things like that. Like, you might not be able to get that Subway sandwich anyway. You might not be able to get that gallon of milk pretty soon anyway, regardless of what you do. So, like you say, rip that Band-Aid off, and it's not easy. And neither one of us here are talking from positions of moral superiority. We're all struggling with that as well as we try to, build and grow our families. But it's a community effort, and so we're all in this together. Let's get back to Reagan here, because we are at our normal 2-hour limit. But I do want to finish this great speech and have some closing thoughts. He says, "Someplace a perversion has taken place." I love that sentence, and it's true. And he couldn't put his finger on it, and I don't think we can either. But we all know. It's like that quote, where they said, "What's pornography? I don't know what pornography is, but I know it when I see it." Yeah. Right. It's like, I don't know where the perversion has taken place in America. And people can point at 1913. They can point at the Roosevelt administration. They can point at blah, 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 blah. But he says, "Our natural unalienable rights are now presumed to be a dispensation of government, divisible by a vote of the majority. The greatest good for the greatest number is a high-sounding phrase, but contrary to the very basis of our nation. Majority rule is nothing more than mob rule. And 50% or more of the population of the United States believes in their heart, with their palm clasped over their chest, saluting the American flag, that majority rule is the definition of the United States." That's our democracy. Modus operandi.
It's just like, whatever the most people want, that's the highest moral good.
And it's not. And as John Adams warned, if you want to go down that road, you'd better make sure that you have a moral and religious people. And we have neither. We have, TikTok thoughts and miscellaneous other retards. No offense to the actually retarded. He says, "It is time that we realize that socialism can come without overt seizure of property or nationalizations of private businesses." And this is a crux. This is a key to understanding where we're at, because, we know now that the perversion has taken place, and we know that we are deep down the rabbit hole. We know that there's been a socialist coup in the United States. But we don't see overt seizure of property, and we don't see nationalization of private business. But this is why Templar and I went over the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto to start out our broadcast, and that is the two things that people think of, equal distribution of labor and abolition of private property as communism, are only 2 of the 8. And the other 7 or 8 things are firmly in place in the United States today. And Reagan's pointing it out. He's like, we're dangerous. We're in some dangerous territory. There are so many crazy laws that the government literally can find some charge to bring against any person that chooses to prosecute. As we're jumping around the speech here, he's talking about tyranny. So he's talking in the earlier part about the degradation and the dissolution of the foundation upon which this country was founded, both culturally and legally, with the founding American stock, the heritage Americans, and then also the laws, the Anglo-Saxon Constitution upon which it was written. The Supreme Court has ruled that in 1964 that the government has the right to tell a citizen what he can grow on his own land for his own use. Secretary of Agriculture has asked for the right to imprison farmers who violate their planting quotas. They didn't get this right, but they tried even 50 years ago. My planting quotas? What the hell? Is this like a collective farm or something? He said, we approach a point of no return when government becomes so huge and entrenched that we fear the consequences of upheaval and just go along with it. And you people tell me today that that isn't exactly where we're at.
That's where we're at.
It is. You've got the go along to get along, and you've got the mask Karens, but then you've got the people on our side who say, well, the government's just become so huge that we fear the consequences, and so we just go along with it. How many of us know people who went ahead and got the shots, even though they know that the shots are death serums or poison or just plain stupid?
Yeah, and I would like to clarify, you are right to fear the government because they will ruin your life and kill you and your dog and won't hesitate to do it. It's not that because as a result of that fear, you should just be paralyzed and do nothing and continue to go along with your day. The takeaway from that fear of the government, which you should have because it is a murderous institution, is to do exactly what we said and eliminate your dependency on the government because they're going to seek those avenues to try to influence you through, those more, it's not subversive, but roundabout ways. They're going to make it illegal for you to go to a grocery store. And then when you're starving to death, it looks a lot different than something like Waco, where it's like black dressed, soldiers burning you and your children alive in their house. Those are two different things. So, yeah, you should fear the government, and your reaction to that fear should be eliminating your dependency on anything that relies on the existence of the government, so that if push does come to shove and you're forced, to get a vaccine, then you go, oh, well, I'm actually not afraid of losing my job or getting barred from a grocery store because I have 6 months of food stocked up in my basement for my family, and I can extend that out to a year and maybe infinitely between the garden in my backyard and that chicken coop that's also in my backyard, and then the animals that I hunt, and then my friend who's a dairy farmer out in town. And now you're starting to become resilient to this entity that normally is definitely deserving to be feared. Now it's just a paper tiger that really has nothing over you other than overt force, and they can't afford to go around and kill everyone. You might be one of the ones that they get to, but there's only so many door kicking and citizen killing a government can do before they end up shooting themselves in the foot.
Proverbially speaking.
Yeah.
I have a different take. And I don't want to negate anything that you said about that, but I don't fear the government at all. For me, I'm a little bit crazy. But I don't mean to sound like holier than thou or holier than anyone, but I'm a very dedicated Christian, but I don't want to come off as too Bible thumping. But really, the only thing I fear is God. And if they come to my house and they kill my dog, then I go John Wick with a big, gigantic smile on my face. And for as long as that lasts. If you want to see a picture of what I look like when the government comes to Waco me for, trying to buy food at the grocery store, look up a picture of Hank Scorpio with a flamethrower. And that's me, a big, giant grin on my face going down in a blaze of glory. And I believe that with all my heart, that's just the kind of guy I am. Maybe it's I tell my wife it's the berserker element in me. I have a lot of Swedish, and it's like it comes out. It's like I'm going down and with a big old axe in my hand and a big smile on my face. And I don't know if anyone else would do that, but it's like, it's whatever the government can do to me is not nearly as bad as what the devil can do to my immortal soul, or even the loss of my own confidence in myself. So somebody on Social Galactic pointed out that, it's like, I forget what they were saying. Geez, I'm all flustered now. But like, just talking about going berserk makes me kind of berserk. But it's like, the government does not have ultimate control over you unless you give them that control. If you let them infiltrate your headspace, then they'll take it over and run with it all day long. But if you're just like, who the F are those people? What makes them think they can control me? I'm as scared of the U.S. government as I am of like Hammurabi or like, King George III. Like they're outside of my realm. I'm doing my own thing. And yes, they can make my life miserable, but that's nothing to be afraid of, because many of our forebears were pioneers. They were founding fathers. They were martyrs in the church. People have suffered a lot more than whatever it is that you and I are going to suffer, and bring it on, because in suffering is a kind of holiness. And if I can approach the level, not that I seek it out, but if I can approach that level of suffering, I can understand better what it means to be a Christian. I don't know if
I'll
that
clarify.
makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I'll clarify my stances in like with respect to temporal power. That's where it starts and ends, the fear. But yes, there is no reason to fear the government beyond your mortal being. They have no power that extends or is in comparison to the divine.
Yeah,
So.
conflict is the air we breathe, as Jake Wilson says, and I concur 100%. I did, and maybe you did too, Templar. Maybe you can speak with it. He says he flirted with the idea that he would get the clot shot to feed the family, but then at this point would never do it. And I think about it. It's kind of like, well, would I eat that apple? And then it's like
for them on their behalf. Like, if
Right.
you're a man, you're gonna endure suffering on behalf of your family, and maybe that is the suffering that you're charged with enduring in order to put food on the table. The way I saw it was, this thing won't go away unless people stop participating in it, and I cannot, in good faith, get that shot and also pretend to be acting in the interests of my family. Because if everyone has that mentality, things will just continue to get worse. So the only right answer is to, like we've been talking about, rip the Band-Aid off, just not participate. We still have time to reorient our lives to not have to choose between vaccination or starving to death. But that window is rapidly closing. So definitely, don't get the vaccine and take steps to insulate yourself from the consequences of not getting the vaccine.
If you haven't got it at all up to now, you're pretty much ahead of the curve, because now even people who have gotten it before are refusing to get it a third or fourth or whatever time. And pretty soon that for me, what it came down to was, it came down to my personal honor in a way. So it's like, well, if I have to feed my family, if I have to do this, we have to endure suffering. But it's like, well, if I die or become, incapacitated or somehow mutated or corrupted, how am I providing for my family? Like, there's more to provide for than just food and money.
Yep.
It's like, I told my wife, I told my daughters, like, I will never get this shot. And you will never get this shot as long as I have anything to say about it. And I will protect you from having to do that. And so it would be counterintuitive for me to then go out and get it just to sort of protect them or whatever. And I did that early on in a way to kind of stake my boundaries. What do they call it? When you're setting up a firing perimeter, or, and you have the stakes on either side, like, this is my firing zone.
Yeah, your left and right lateral limits.
There you go.
There's a name for that, though.
There is. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Traversing zone. Yeah.
But it's like I put it here and I put it here, and this is the bounds in which I will operate and which you can expect me to operate, because what my children and what my wife and what my parents and what everyone needs who depends on me is stability and sticking to my word, I guess, for lack of a better term. You had talked about briefly, and because I'm sorry, I just want to keep going to this, is something about a tipping point. And Reagan says we approach a point of no return when government becomes so huge and entrenched that we fear the consequences. And if he's saying that in 1964, how naive would we have to be to think that that point of no return has not already passed? Mm-hmm. Think about that. Oh God, I could talk about this forever. I wish I was on with Doomcock or somebody, but like it's a science fiction kind of thing. He's a Star Wars guy, but and I'm never on with him. I just listen. But it's like there's this thing out there not in science fiction, even in like astrophysics, called the Great Filter. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it, who are listening, but like the Great Filter basically says there's a reason why when we look out into outer space we see absolutely nothing. I have my own personal theories about this, but the Great Filter theory basically says maybe it's because anything that gets to a sufficiently advanced level of technology or growth dies, right? And so there's two ways to look at that. Is the Great Filter in front of us, or is the Great Filter behind us? Have we already passed that Great Filter? Is the Great Filter like fire building and manipulating your environment or something, or intelligence? If the Great Filter is behind us, we have the entire universe to expand out into. If the Great Filter is in front of us, we're going to die, And it's like this with what Reagan is saying. If the point of no return is, it's kind of inverse. If the point of no return is in front of us, well, we've still got time to change course. Right. But if the point of no return is in the rearview mirror, then we are boned. And it's been 50 years since Reagan said this, maybe more. My math ain't great today, but like black pill time, we're in trouble, which is why we need community. He says the government spends $11 million an hour, every hour, in a day, and pretends that we had a tax cut while it pursues policies of planned inflation that will more than wipe out any benefit of our purchasing power. And that was 1964. How much more has our inflation eaten away at our wealth? There hasn't been a wage gain, a real like what economists call a real wage gain, since the early 1980s. I've said before on the podcast, my dad used to tape all of his paychecks together over time, and would watch how much more money he would make in 1993 than he did in 1983. But if you adjusted that for inflation, he was standing still, mm-hmm. And all of our parents were, and all of our grandparents were, and we're actually regressing now, which is why the Zoomer generation is going to have a harder time of it than any generation before in American history. He said, if a visitor from Mars looked at our tax policy, he would conclude that it had been designed by a communist spy to make free enterprise unworkable. And that was 1964. If you've ever read the Venona decrypts, you know that communist spies were rife throughout the federal bureaucracy. What are the chances that the federal tax code was designed by communist spies to make free enterprise unworkable? Because guess what? It used to work when we didn't have an income tax, when we didn't have all that progressive nonsense, when we didn't have inflation the same way, when we had sound money, when we didn't have a national bank. The tax policy, Reagan said, is designed to make changes to our social structure. Now think about that. I mean, that is social engineering writ large. That's what the Nazis did. That's the bread and butter of the communist Chinese system, is to use economics to warp the social structure to something other than what it would be. The only other option is free enterprise, where the invisible hand of the market and laissez-faire and some basic hands-on type stuff that the founding fathers frequently experimented with. But this is all that we've got, right? You had President Lyndon Johnson in 1964 say, we are going to take money from the people who spend it unnecessarily we are going to take it from the haves and give to the have-nots who need it so much, end quote. That was President Johnson, probably definitely one of the worst presidents the United States has ever had. You know, speaking of unnecessary spending, and he goes off and spends the blood and treasure of the United States in some crap hole in Southeast Asia for no gain. That's almost identical, Reagan says, to from each according to his ability to each according to his need. That's what Karl Marx said. You know, Lyndon Johnson was a communist by his own words right here. Obama, surprising to me, wasn't our first communist president. And he's clearly not our last, since we have Gropey Dopey up there pretending to be president. You know, he says, so continuing through, I'm sorry. Did you want to jump in there, Templar? I'm sorry.
No, it was a roll.
The immorality. This is Reagan calls the tax code immoral and discriminatory. Right? There's no amount of injustice or folly that you may not commit if you abandon the cardinal principle of extracting from all individuals the same proportion of their income. Right? Our founding fathers knew this. They weren't idiots. They said if you take more from the fat person and less from the thin person, you're going to generate animosity. Well, gee, what was the one thing that the communists couldn't get a foothold on America because of? There was no class animosity, because there was no class. I mean, you know, there's a double entendre there. But, you know, if you can just go off into the woods and lumberjack your way to success, you don't need to worry about class, right? Freedom, he says, has never been so fragile and so close from slipping from our grasp. And I ask you if you think that the rhinos and the John McCains and the schmucks that are on our side, supposedly, you know, even the Sarah Palins and the Candace Owens and the goofball people like that, have not allowed the freedom to slip from our grasp in the intervening 50 or 60 years. He says, if some among you fear taking a stand because you are afraid of reprisals from customers or clients or the government, recognize that you are feeding the crocodile, hoping he'll eat you last. And that's exactly
which is why we don't get the vaccine. Yep,
exactly. That this is so pertinent to what we are dealing with today. This is exactly what Templar was saying earlier. You know, don't be afraid of reprisals from customers, clients, the government. It doesn't matter, right? Don't feed the crocodile hoping he'll eat you last, because the crocodile will always eat you. You don't get eaten. Just walk away, right? He says, we are faced with the most evil enemy mankind has ever known in his long climb from the swamp to the stars.
Which is not an exaggeration. That is not an exaggeration. We saw what happened what the communists are capable of in the turn 20th century. You almost can't even fault the Nazis for fighting so hard against them. You know, and I saw this is kind of besides the point, but it was a video of Ukrainians praying for the Germans as they headed towards Stalingrad, because the worst nightmare the Ukrainians could have imagined was the return of the communists to their country.
Yeah, and return they did, partly because the Germans were so idiotic that they mishandled the domestic situation in the occupied territories in the East. You know, Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, idiots. You know, I mean, incompetent morons when it came to that sort of a thing. But that's a whole other story. You know, I mean, I take the Nazis over the communists. I think a lot of us might. Although the Nazis had a lot of problems of their own. We'll get to that actually here at a little bit later. Reagan sort of brings that same thing up. He says there can be no security anywhere in the free world if there is not a fiscal and economically stable United States. That's absolutely true. When we are neither fiscally nor economically stable now, that means there can be no security in the free world, which means that you can't really have a free world. They tell us, they, meaning the liberals, that by avoiding direct confrontation with the enemy, he will learn to love us. The only argument is with regard to the best way to avoid war. He says there's only one sure way to avoid war: surrender, right?
Which is true.
It is
It's true. If you surrender, if you roll over immediately, then you won't have to fight a war.
Exactly. It might not go well for you. He says appeasement does not give you a choice between peace and war. It only gives you a choice between fighting and surrendering. And I thought that was brilliant, right? Because people say, well, appeasement, well, you can't appease your way to peace and you can't appease your way out of war, but you can appease your way out of having to fight. Look at Czechoslovakia. They didn't fight, right? They were given over due to appeasement. And that was the heartstring that Reagan was pulling on here in 1964, because it had only been 20 years earlier when Czechoslovakia had been sold out. He says there's no easy answer to any of this, but there is a simple answer. We have to have the courage to do what we know is morally right. And that's what we talk about here on this channel. Completely. He starts to end the end of this speech by saying that there are some people in Britain and other places who have said that they'd rather live on their knees than die on their feet. Other people have said better red than dead, right? He says, if we are to believe that nothing is worth dying for, when did this begin? Right? Should Christ have refused the cross? Should the patriots that conquered Bridge have refused to fire the shot heard around the world? Should Moses have told the children of Israel to live in slavery? That is not who we are, right? We are better dead than red. We would rather die on our feet.
I would like to provide one caveat to the options of either being red or dead. I propose dead reds.
Yes, so do I. This is probably the
no
best
more.
way to do things.
I'm not going to choose between either being dead or being red. I'm going to choose dead reds.
That is the third way. That is indeed the third way. Reagan ends his speech with, you and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We can preserve for our children this and the last best hope of man on earth, or we can sentence them to take the first step into 1,000 years of darkness.
1,000 years of darkness.
If we fail, at least let our children and our children's children say of us that we were justified in our brief moment here. And that's where we were at. It's hard to say right now whether we have in fact stepped into that 1,000 years of darkness. But what I can say is that we, who are the children and the children's children, say of that generation that they did not justify their brief moment here. Maybe there's still time for us to justify ours, but it will involve a lot of what Jake is saying. It will involve a lot of what Mr. Templar is saying. Because
I would like to point out, that with respect to that, earlier he says, admittedly, there's risk in any course of action we follow, and choosing the high road doesn't eliminate the risk. In fact, it probably only enhances it. But there's also a risk in doing nothing. So, if you're gonna have to incur risk, if you're gonna have to endure suffering, you might as well do it justifying your quote unquote brief moment of history.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I completely agree. You had some good closing thoughts, Mr. Templar. Did you want to share those with us? The 5 steps.
Oh, the 5 steps. I want to say that for another video, because we take all this in and we take into the fact that it's from 1964, and the question is, what do we do with this information? We kind of hinted at it a little bit, stepping away from society. But when we talk about, we're not just talking about building some kind of political movement, getting the guys that we want into office, and then I don't know. It's different than putting our Federal Reserve chairman in versus the leftist Federal Reserve chair in. It's a little bit more than that, and it's definitely a changing landscape. It's a different America. It's comprised of different people now, so we're going to have to start thinking outside the box a little bit if we want to live in the society, or if we're going to live in the society that we want to live in. So I think we kind of hit the hammer, or hit the nail on the head here with what we were trying to convey with this, which is basically that things were bad now. Reagan identified what those things were. They are always the result of a malevolent government interfering in our personal lives, and we would be better off if they weren't. And then they punish us for attempting to turn away. It's essentially illegal now. Just like the farmers, you're not allowed to grow your own crop, and we're gonna try to throw you in jail if you do try to decide what you want to do with your own crops, your own property. Got it. I think we hammer home the point that the government's not your friend. It's comprised of people who hate you. And we've seen throughout U.S. history what they're willing to do to its own citizens. I think in the future, we'll discuss, the way ahead. What do we do with this information? How do we preserve for our children this last best hope of man on earth? And that's the question we need to be asking ourselves, because I think we're very aware that now is the time for choosing. We can't afford to do nothing, and our hand is being forced whether we like it or not. We're being presented with ultimatums, get the vaccine or starve. Okay, that's a pretty serious decision. You have three options: starve, get the vaccine, or carve out, create out of suffering and grit a third way, as we pointed out. And so I think in the future, I would like to discuss what that third way is, what that path to that third way is. But that would be my takeaway from all of this is, again, we recognize that things were bad then, things are worse today. The trend line is not looking good. They will probably be worse farther in the future. We need to accept that fact and start taking steps to check out of this losing battle.
I concur wholeheartedly, and I look forward to going over those with you. Now that we've sort of set the groundwork for what Reagan was saying, it gives us good fodder for future streams. So with those closing thoughts, I would like to thank the listeners, whether you're listening to us live or whether you're listening to us on the replay. We would ask you to subscribe to the channel. I thank you for actually, we got a few subscriptions when this started. I'd like you to share it out, by the way, if you could. And we'll be bringing you more and more content as we're able to, and as our lives allow, so that we can build that community. Thank you so much again for the absent Miss Cherie and for Templar. This is Commander Culture saying tomorrow belongs to you, to the stars.